Russia didn't see this coming. For decades, the US has relied on aging armored vehicles like the M113 and M2 Bradley to transport troops and fight on the battlefield. But those vehicles are becoming obsolete, and now America has unveiled something new, something that's about to change the game. Meet the AMPV, the Armored Multi-Purpose Vehicle. Faster, tougher, and more adaptable than its predecessors, this beast is designed to dominate modern battlefields. And here's the kicker: it might already be heading to the front lines, and Russia knows exactly what that means. But what makes this vehicle so special? What cutting-edge tech does it bring to the fight? And why is it sending shockwaves through military circles worldwide? Let's break it all down. First, what exactly are these new vehicles that are supposed to change the game in infantry fighting? According to BAE Systems, the vehicle is designed to be an adaptable, heavily armored vehicle that takes advantage of decades of technological progress that has happened since the previous transport vehicles, i.e. the M113s, were first produced. The shell of the vehicle is reminiscent of the Bradley, as the initial plan for the vehicle was to remove the Bradley's manned turret and add a multi-function slot that could be fitted with a variety of turret extensions to change the vehicle's operational capacities when needed. On the surface, reusing the Bradley shells isn't that odd, as the Bradleys are still one of the most modern infantry fighting vehicles, or IFVs, in existence and have performed admirably wherever they were deployed, including in the war in Ukraine. The armor plating of the Bradley is durable enough to withstand most smaller autocannon fire, while also being light enough to give the vehicle some element of maneuverability. However, while BAE did start production by retrofitting a few hundred Bradley hulls, the first unveiled AMPV prototype in October 2024 bears only a superficial resemblance to the M2 Bradley from the turret down. The prototype actually came with a turret, but a completely different one from the stock turret on the Bradley. Unlike the previous turret designs, the new AMPV was designed to have an unmanned turret that would electronically link to the target and firing systems inside the armor. This process might seem odd at first. BAE started with a Bradley, decided that they wanted to use the hull as the base due to its armor and availability of spare parts, got rid of the turret altogether, and then reinstalled a new turret. However, the difference between an unmanned turret and a manned one shouldn't be understated. You see, in the M2 Bradley, the turret takes center stage in the vehicle, requiring the interior to be designed to accommodate the turret operator, or operators in some older IFV designs, first and foremost. With an unmanned turret, the component is basically a plug-and-play attachment to the top of the vehicle's hull. That leaves the rest of the interior free to be used as infantry or medical supply transport, or retrofitted with navigation and communications modules to turn it into a mobile command center while still retaining the benefits of being armored. The baseline advantage of using an unmanned turret to save space is essentially what makes the unveiled AMPV potentially groundbreaking when it comes to infantry warfare. This is largely due to how the M113 and the M2 Bradley were designed and conceptualized. The M113 is a Vietnam War-era infantry transport vehicle, technically an armored personnel carrier or APC, developed with the goal of moving as many soldiers as possible to the front line. This was achieved by creating an aluminium hull and putting it on top of a relatively light and watertight chassis. The aluminium hull provided decent protection from gunfire for its time, while making the entire vehicle light enough to support amphibious operations and airdropping from C-130 and C-141 transport planes. This meant that the initial prototypes of the vehicle were not designed to take part in actual fighting. The vehicles would be airdropped relatively close to the front and driven near active battlefields, where the soldiers would dismount and allow the lightly armored vehicle to retreat. As such, the objective of the M113 was to carry as many soldiers as possible while having a small foot or track print. The vehicle itself was usually fitted with a basic 50 caliber M2 machine gun, but later variations used anti-tank guns or automatic grenade launchers. If it was outfitted with a turret, it would still only be useful against infantry, as its aluminium shell provided minimal to no protection against higher caliber cannons or mines. One of the main benefits of developing the M113 to be used solely for troop transport was that you could fit 11 or more soldiers, alongside 2 crew members, inside a tiny vehicle. The lightweight would allow the vehicle to use a modest engine to reach speeds of around 40 miles an hour. As such, the US Army could rapidly deploy hundreds of soldiers by leveraging the M113s as its primary troop transport. But as you might have already noticed, modern warfare is seldom infantry-focused, which is why the M113 has become practically obsolete. This is evidenced by the website Oryx, which lists all the vehicle and material losses accrued by Ukraine throughout the war. To date, there are 258 confirmed losses of US-donated M113s. Based on some reports, the US provided around 900 of these vehicles to Ukraine over the course of the war, giving them a practically unprecedented over 25% loss rate. This shouldn't really be a surprise, considering that most M113s don't have the means to deal with the prevalent drone and artillery warfare coming from the Russian side of the front. After all, the Vietnam-era vehicles have electronics that are far below what could be considered contemporary. This stems from the relatively weak engine and batteries that can't support modern electronic systems that could work against drones. With the M113 being basically obsolete, it's surprising that they haven't been replaced by other infantry transport vehicles already. But this doesn't take into account the fact that the vehicles are relatively inexpensive and easy to mass produce, so the US Army doesn't have to use significant funds to stock its mechanized infantry with reliable vehicles. But why didn't the Bradley become the go-to transport? Well, it's an infantry fighting vehicle at its core that can only comfortably seat 6 passengers due to the crew size of 3, commander, driver and gunner, and a bulky turret in the center of the hull. It would take twice the number of Bradleys and many more crew members to transport the same number of soldiers as with the M113. Additionally, Bradleys don't have full amphibious capabilities and are nowhere near as cheap to build, repair, or even refuel. The BAE prototype essentially brings the best parts of the M2 Bradley and the M113 together. By using the larger chassis of the Bradley as the base, the new AMPV is estimated to have about 78% more interior volume. If the M113 could transport 11 soldiers, the new vehicle could, in theory, transport at least as many, while also having enough room for additional equipment, crew members, and other navigational and operational tools. Then there's the matter of the advanced armor manufacturing capacities. Unlike with the M113 or even the initial Bradley designs, the hull of the new AMPV is created from a single piece of welded aluminium armor with spaced laminate armor fitted to the hull. This monolithic structure is supposed to have roughly twice the survivability against gunfire and actually adds more protection against explosives. Additionally, the process of essentially molding pieces of aluminium to a definitive shape and welding some parts for reinforcement can take much less time than building a hull from pieces. Furthermore, modern automation technology in manufacturing allows for a much stricter level of control and minimizes margins of error and variance. What this means is that the factories making the hulls can likely churn out new armored vehicles much faster than before, allowing the US military to quickly get a new stock of vehicles ready for any future conflict. Based on the Congressional Research Report for the AMPV, the target seems to be at least 131 vehicles per year for the next 3 years. The same report suggests that the Army is expecting around 2,800 to 3,000 of these vehicles to be incorporated into the armed forces over the coming 2 decades, making them one of the most numerous armored vehicles in service. This also includes the potential for giving away some of the prototypes to Ukraine if that hasn't already happened, which we'll discuss later. The same report that outlined estimated production yields also suggested that the US sent 900 M113s, which were nearing obsolescence already, to Ukraine, as previously mentioned. This put a dent in the number of transport vehicles the military has at its disposal, but it also opened the door to increasing the budget of the AMPV development and production programs to $1.6 billion, making it one of the best financed programs in the military at the moment. The M113s that were in Ukraine for the past 3 years have arguably been put to rigorous use by the native military, as the losses have mounted on both sides. Specifically, beyond the 900 donated M113s were also 300 medical transport vehicles, some of which were M113 variants themselves. Both types of vehicles show that there's still a market and a need for infantry transport, but also that a vehicle that can only perform that singular role has little place on modern battlefields. The M113s were simply too limited to deal with incoming drones, artillery, and heavier cannon fire. This could also explain why the US was willing to give them away to Ukraine in the first place. By removing the vehicles from active service, the military was basically ridding itself of what was possibly its weakest link in ground warfare. The most notable US opponents on the geopolitical scene are China, Iran, and arguably Russia, all of which primarily use either heavy armor or long-range strikes. While China hasn't been an active part of a conflict for some time, the fact that the newer M113s aren't actually amphibious at all makes them badly suited for littoral warfare, which is estimated to be one of the few avenues of combat that the US plans to use in a theoretical conflict with China. In contrast, the prototype AMPVs can be fitted with a vast assortment of turrets, from autocannons to mortar launchers, anti-tank missile launchers, and even fully automated anti-drone turrets that have already been field-tested against modern common drone designs currently in use. In particular, there's one design that seems to have caused more traction: mortar systems. The initial report from BAE suggests that the prototypes were fitted with the Patria Nemo 120mm automatic mortar launcher. If you've been following the channel closely, you might remember that Patria is a Finnish government-owned defense contractor. That same government has also, quite conveniently, repeatedly mentioned that it's been sending prototypes for future weapons to Ukraine. This is unlike most NATO countries, which have so far mainly been sending weapons that were on their way out of service anyway. The Patriot Nemo, short for New Mortar, is a fully automatic fire-and-forget mortar launcher, with an estimated fire rate of around 10 rounds per minute while at full speed. This is practically unprecedented among conventional mortar launchers, which are typically either slow or can only reliably target while standing. Considering that Patriot also makes an armored multi-purpose vehicle of its own, the Patriot AMV, there's a high likelihood that the systems involved are either highly related or perhaps even the same. Furthermore, with Patriot allegedly sending some of its prototypes to the Ukraine front, as well as establishing contracts for manufacturing its own AMVs in Poland and Ukraine under the Patriot license, there's a distinct possibility that we might see more countries than just the US pop up with brand new armored vehicles in the coming years. In fact, with BAE unveiling the next-generation vehicles, those same vehicles may already have been field-tested in Ukraine against Russia. While reports of a brand new military vehicle would have likely been leaked from the battlefield, this could be explained by systems being dispersed in pieces. Since the new vehicles already use Bradley hulls as the base, BAE might have received valuable input from how 300 Bradleys performed in Ukraine so far to optimize the armor and make it more future-proof. At the same time, emerging trends in drone warfare likely led to Ukraine using pretty much every promising design it could get its hands on, all of which are likely treasure troves of useful data for optimizing anti-drone turrets and tracking systems, like the ones showcased with the Patriot Nemo and similar attachments. A second news report from BAE suggested that the prototype's fifth and most current iteration is expected to support 30 or more different turrets, all using the common top plate that it shared with the Patriot designs mentioned above. This gives the vehicles practically unmatched versatility on and off the battlefield. With the congressional report promising around 3,000 of these vehicles in service over the next 20 years, the US Army can essentially play a big game of mix and match with the new AMPVs to make them perfectly suited to the expected operations in any conflict. Given the current state of events, this likely means that anti-drone, anti-armor, medical treatment, and medical transport options might have the most merit. The medical treatment vehicle essentially doubles as an armored surgical center, with the ability to secure wounded soldiers and provide first aid while the vehicle is on the move and retreating from an active battlefield. This is supported by the enlarged internal area, which allows a soldier to be laid down and treated while others work around him. It and the medevac transport vehicle are unlikely to have a turret fitted onto the top, but will undoubtedly benefit from increased carrying capacity, armor, and the potential to get more modern armament options to provide support and cover fire if needed. All in all, BAE expects the new AMPVs to be employed in 5 different roles: general purpose, command, medical transport, medical treatment, and mortar carrier. Each of these types of vehicles is produced on the same line in the same factory, so the US military can dictate exactly which types of vehicles it wants the contractor to prioritize. This also alludes to the future-proofing concept that BAE is pushing with the design. The differences between the 5 different AMPV types are likely to be minor enough for production to not have to be significantly affected by part or supply chain demands, as each vehicle could potentially be retrofitted into another type and approved for service in a pinch. So with all these promising prospects of the US Army getting a new toy, how does that play into the global military power rankings? For one, Russia has already had significant difficulties trying to exert pressure on Ukraine over land over the past 3 years. Apart from the initial invasion managing to push only a few miles away from Kyiv, Russia has failed to make meaningful progress in the previous 6 months, owing to the fact that it's probably exhausted some of its modern armor and others not being strong enough to withstand attacks from swarms of drones. At the same time, M2 Bradleys have been reported to be able to go toe-to-toe with Russian T-90Ms, some of the most advanced tanks that Russia has deployed to the front, apart from the ridiculed T-14 Armata, which showed up for a mere 2 weeks before being pulled. The advantage that the Bradleys have over Russian and presumably Chinese tanks stems from more advanced electronics and optics systems. This, plus the fact that modern Bradley turrets can effectively fire on the move, means that they can engage targets at a longer range and in inclement weather conditions. If BAE used the Bradley's electronics equipment as a base and improved upon it, then the new AMPVs could have similar levels of battlefield awareness and competency. This could make the mortar carriers and anti-drone cannon units true menaces, picking off targets while hovering around the battlefield, figuratively. In the same vein, medevac and command vehicles would allow the US Army much greater operational capabilities, taking advantage of the downtime imposed onto Russian vehicles by bad weather and low-vision scenarios. Perhaps more importantly, Russia might not be concerned about what these vehicles could do in the future, but what they could do right now. There are 2 distinct scenarios that might come into play. 1. Patriot ends up starting production of its own AMV, which is wheeled rather than tracked, using the same advanced mortar launcher and anti-drone complement. The first batch of vehicles are produced in Poland and Ukraine and are immediately being used in the ongoing war. Considering that the US is expecting around 130 new vehicles per month, it's unclear how many Ukraine and Poland could produce. However, given Poland's recent investments into its military-industrial complex and national defense, it's possible that Ukraine might be able to get dozens of these vehicles deployed during 2025, if the war lasts that long. The new vehicles could end up heavily skewing the tide of battle in Ukraine's favor again by being mobile anti-drone units that support Ukraine's already impressive mid- and long-range activities. It could allow Ukraine to slowly take back the land Russia has occupied by cutting off logistics support and denying drone-based surveillance. The second scenario involves the US and NATO deciding to adopt the new AMPVs to a wider degree and ramping up the budget and production capacities. It could mean that the factories create more than the projected targets of vehicles, which would either be solely used by the US or ordered by NATO members independently. In turn, each vehicle will replace an existing, older infantry support vehicle or carrier. These old vehicles could then be pledged to Ukraine, giving the country's military yet another boost in land equipment. Considering that many NATO countries have already divested their Soviet-era equipment, with most of them going to Ukraine, the next batches of donations could come from newer systems, putting them on par with the likes of Sweden and Finland in giving away modern weaponry. It would allow Ukraine to catch up, so to speak, to Russian technology in aspects that are not solely confined to drone warfare. In either case, the war in Ukraine might see interesting new developments if the prototypes go into full production, and we might be seeing reports of new vehicles showing up on battlefield footage during 2025. But what do you think? Is the new AMPV a game changer or just a waste of the US military's time and money? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you as always for watching.